clubs are now looking at Newcastle, saying that they could maybe prize away some of their players due to the financial fair play regulations. Obviously, Darren Eales came out and publicly admitted that Newcastle might have to sell some players to subsidise their own transfer plans in the future as well. So Bayern Munich hoping to capitalise on that. They've made a couple of bids for Kieran Trippier, and both bids have been rejected so far, but I think still a lot to go in this one. I think Kieran Trippier would be very much interested in the move to Bayern Munich to link up with Harry Kane and Eric Dyer. So I don't think this one's going to go away anytime soon. So this could drag right on till the close of the window next Thursday. Obviously, you know what Bayern Munich like, such a big club. They don't come for a player unless they think they've got a real good chance of signing them. So they're going to still be making bids. And I think if that bid gets close to £20 million, I think it's a deal that Newcastle would reluctantly have to accept for Kieran Trippier, I think he turns 34 next September as well. So I think it would, although he's club captain there and everything, and when he's playing when Jamal Lascelles isn't involved, I think it's a good deal for Newcastle if they are looking to balance the books as well. While the one who looks most likely to leave is Miguel Almiron, who seems like he is very close to a move to the Saudi Pro League. Al Shabaab are in talks now with Newcastle, trying to thrash out a fee for the Paraguayan, and talks are now set to continue between Al Shabaab and Almiron to try and get that deal over the line. And again, I think obviously he's been a popular figure up on Tyneside, Almiron, I think amongst the fans, and also he's done a good job under Eddie Howe, who I think Eddie Howe has improved him as a player as well. But I think if Newcastle can recoup £30 million or so for Almiron, it makes financial sense to me that they can use that money to bring in a signing of their own, even this window, or if not, try and use it for the summer transfer window when there might need to be a bit of a rebuild of Eddie Howe's squad.
Paul, of course, we spoke last week about Newcastle. We had that quick joke around Bruno Guimaraes going over to Paris to do a shopping trip. But all of a sudden in that week, we've gone from rumours that might be happening to looking like real potential deals. What are your thoughts on both of those deals, and how much of a blow would losing both of them be?
Well, it just shows. I mean, I think that's, when you look at Newcastle, I think that sums up the whole window. I mean, most clubs are looking to trim the squads because they're all so scared of this financial fair play now. Look at what's happened to Everton. Look at what's happened to Forest. Everybody's really conscious of towing the line. And this whole window, up to now, has been about moving players on. And Almiron, Trippier, they've been a key part of what Newcastle have done and what they've done well. The Almiron one, I'm surprised at, to be honest. I think he's at the heart of everything they do. He triggers the press, his attitude, his application in every game that he plays. He starts the press off when you watch Newcastle, and what he gives that team. Everyone else seems to follow his lead. His energy during games, the ground that he covers. I'm surprised that they are actually willing to do deals, but it just shows where Newcastle are in the financial situation. And, you know, you look at the likes of Man City, you look at the likes of Chelsea, you look at the money spent, and Newcastle are nowhere near that. And that's when you got to look at it and the club and the stature and the size of the club, the global appeal and the revenue that the club brings in. That's the difference where the clubs are at the moment. I mean, Trippier was the catalyst for everything under Eddie Howe. He was the first signing. He was the best signing, made him captain. And I think everyone, it didn't follow, but saw Kieran Trippier going to Newcastle and then jumped on the bandwagon, and he was the leader kind of thing. So this is almost the start of the next level for Newcastle, if you like. It's rejuvenating the squad, but it's also rejuvenating the squad by being very, very careful with a financial fair play. Like I said, the Almiron one, I think he's improved so much since he's come over. When he first came to Newcastle, he was a little bit like a wasp in a bottle, in all honesty, and he didn't really have any structural position or anything. But now the way he plays, he can play on the left, play on the right, and I think Newcastle will miss him. I really do.
Yeah, I mean, Pete, do you think fans should have the right to be concerned going forwards? Because actually, it seems to be now that quite a few giants across the world, I mean, you've spoken about Bayern Munich. I know we've obviously spoken about PSG, Bruno Guimaraes potentially for the summer. Do Newcastle fans have the right to be concerned going into not only this window, but the following and more to come as well?
Yeah, I think they've got every right to be concerned. Obviously, when they had to take over from the Saudi PIF fund, they all thought that the Newcastle would be splashing the cash signing the world's best players. But obviously, due to FFP regulations, they've not been able to flex their muscles really, which they could do. Arguably, on paper, they are the richest club in the world, but they haven't been able to back that up in the transfer market because of these restraints that they're working under, which is going to be frustrating for supporters and also for Eddie Howe, who's now having to wheel and deal almost, having to cash in on some of his established players right now to raise funds to make signings of his own as well. So the last thing Eddie Howe wants to do is to break this team up. As Paul's mentioned there, Kieran Trippier is such a key player in that side since his arrival from Atletico Madrid. You don't want to see players like that going out the door. It sort of sends out the wrong signal. So I think for Eddie Howe, he will want backing in the transfer market, but I think he's well aware of what Newcastle are working under right now as well. And it's not just him. They've also got other things to consider going into this summer transfer window. The Bruno Guimaraes one isn't going to go away. That's going to be a transfer saga, I think, for the summer. Speaking right here, I see him leaving. I think Newcastle will cash in on that 100 million release clause, and you'll have clubs like Barcelona, Real Madrid, PSG all ready to sign Bruno Guimaraes as well. Now they've got the extra headache of Joelinton now so far failing to agree a new contract, and his contract's up in 2025. So they're big players to replace, and not easy to find those players. As Paul will well know, it's all fair and well getting money in for these players, but then it's spending it wisely to try and bring in replacements.
I think this is the first test for Eddie Howe in his managerial career at this level. I mean, you look at what he's done previously in his managerial career, and the credit that he's got in the bank. I think he's done a fantastic job personally at Newcastle. I think the pressure that he's been under has been unfair. There's reasons for that, and I think the Newcastle fans understand that. But now they've come to a really critical point, I think, under his tenureship. You look at where they are now. Yes, they've got to trade players, but he's got to rejuvenate a squad that's capable of competing for the top four in the Premier League. You know, this is a place in his managerial career that he's not been before. He's got all this wealth and all this finance to deal with, but he's also got to ship players out and remold the squad, which isn't something that he's done before. He's gradually grown a squad, which he's done very, very impressively, taking Newcastle from the bottom 6, bottom 8 of the Premier League, bought players to get them to the next level, bought players to get them to the next level. He's always built. He's never kind of had to rejuvenate a squad. And he's got to do that on a very tight budget with, you know, the knowing that the club's expectations are going to be high because of what he achieved last year.
And if I'm correct in saying, Pete, as well, he's only got 8 days of the window left, doesn't he? So it's not only that. I mean, Paul, you're exactly right. But I think the difference with summer is you have that longer window to actually rejuvenate the squad. You know, you can prep more. There's more time into scouting. Whereas now it looks like they could lose 2 key assets and they have effectively a week to go. I mean, it must be really difficult. Pete, are there any talks of potential incomings or any players are there any positives that Newcastle fans could take onto this?
Positives for Newcastle fans that they want this window to close and hope that Trippier stays and everything like that. But yeah, they're obviously looking. They've got a good recruitment team at St James's Park. One player that we reported on Football Insider was Antonio Nusa, the Club Brugge winger, who obviously Spurs are trying to sign this window. A very highly rated young player, Norwegian international. He's somebody that Newcastle are looking at potentially as a replacement for Miguel Almiron. He fits the profile for the type of signing that Newcastle are looking to bring in right now. He's under the age of 24. He's got real room for growth and potential resale value as well. So he's one that they are looking at. Tottenham still favourites for his signature right now as well. They've been in talks with Club Brugge over a deal as well. But if Newcastle do get some money in from the Almiron sale or even the Trippier sale as well, they could make a late push for him as well. Another name that's been mentioned is Morgan Gibbs-White of Nottingham Forest, who for me, he's one of the best young players in the Premier League on his day. Very talented player. Didn't really work out for him at Wolves, so he made the move to Nottingham Forest, and he's really kicked on there. And obviously, he's a key man in that Forest side. So I don't imagine Forest will be too keen to cash in on him in January, especially with their situation with a potential points deduction and a relegation dogfight as well. And then we mentioned last week as well, they have sent scouts to look at the Atalanta midfielder Ederson. Again, he could be a player who could maybe replace Bruno Guimaraes if he does leave in the summer as well. And there's also reported interest in Amadou Onana from Everton, who's been linked with Arsenal in this transfer window as well. But I don't see any move for him this transfer window, maybe in the summer, depending what's happening at Everton. But yeah, Newcastle, I don't know what Paul feels, but do you think it's almost a case of write this season off and reset for next season?
Almost, yeah. They've got to write the first half of the season off. And I think the thing going into the second half of the season with this window, myself and others before we knew about the FFP, excuse me, you were looking at Newcastle and you're thinking injuries, suspensions, Tonali's ban, etc. Players, he's desperately short of players. That the thing that they've missed all season is squad depth. Go into January and bolster your squad, get some players and bring players in. Now we're learning that the FFP and the situation that they're in, they're talking about ripping the heart out of the team with Trippier, Almiron and others, and then having to restructure and bring others in. It's almost a case of if it's not broke, don't fix it. Look at what Trippier does every week. Look at what Almiron does every week. Why would you look to get rid of your 2 better players only because you can and you have to, if you like, because of the rules that have come in? But yeah, I mean, this for this Newcastle fans, the second half of this season, it looks like it's going to be pretty much more of the same from the first half of the season, which, as going into this, like I say, from a Newcastle fan's point of view, you'd want reinforcements, you'd want players coming in. You certainly wouldn't want talk of losing Bruno. You wouldn't want talk of losing Almiron or Kieran Trippier, which is a situation they're in, which is why, again, it's a big test for Eddie Howe as to who he brings in and how they kick on from this position.
I think they're in a really, obviously, as we've all said, a really difficult position. If we talk about Antonio Nusa, Pete, what can fans expect to see from him? You've said there that it sounds like Tottenham have been linked heavily with him too. Newcastle might hijack that deal. What sort of a player is he?
Yeah, he's a skillful player, young, energetic, can play on both wings as well. As I said, 18, already playing for Norway and playing at a decent level for Club Brugge. He's got an eye for goal, can also create goals as well. So he's an exciting player. I think he's got real potential. I think with his speed, skill and power, I think he could be a real asset in the Premier League, and playing with better players, I'm sure you'll see an improvement in Antonio Nusa as well, who's been linked with the likes of Chelsea, Fulham, Brentford in the past as well. But it does look like Tottenham are pushing to try and get this deal done, and now Newcastle are maybe planning a late move if they do have the money to do it, to try and bring him in. So yeah, he's a player with huge potential, and I think he could be a real star for the future. We've seen how good this Norway team is at the minute with the likes of Haaland and Odegaard as well. I think Nusa is the next one from this Norwegian setup to really make a big splash.
I mean, Paul, you kind of said in there, you know, we've discussed some potential exits. Should Newcastle really be looking at bringing in players who are already proven and established rather than bringing in players for the future? What are your thoughts?
Well, there's a big word there, what Pete uses, potential. He's got fantastic potential at such a young age. We've seen players come to the Premier League. I mean, some take to it like a duck to water and hit the ground running. Others, it takes a while to settle. And in Newcastle's situation where they are, it's not a case of wanting to, it's a case of having to. I think, you know, from what we're talking about, from what we're reading, it's a case of having to move players out and bring new players in. But it's a risk. You bring a young player in. Yes, he's a fantastic young player with great attacking potential. You bring him into the Tottenham squad, that's what he goes into. He goes into the Tottenham squad. You bring him into Newcastle to replace Almiron, he's going to be playing 70% of the games between now and the end of the season until you get your injuries back, until you get new players back, because of the amount of players that they have got missing and they're going to have to ship out. Of course, it's a risk, but if it's a risk that they feel they can take and put him straight into the squad and it works, you know, it's one that they may have to take.
And Pete, given their financial woes at the moment, you know, Lewis Hall's on loan from Chelsea, buyout clause about £28 million. Given their financial worries, you know, could they be forced not signing him because they actually don't have the ability to going in the window, because they have to be so careful and focused about who they are going to sign? Do you think this actually is going to really damage their transfer structure and plans going into future windows?
It'll obviously make them revisit their plans going down the line, what they're going to do. Obviously, when everybody saw the Saudi takeover, they thought that's endless amounts of money that Newcastle will be spending in transfer windows to try and sign the best players around. Regards Lewis Hall, I don't think Chelsea would have let him go to Newcastle if there wasn't a guaranteed obligation that deal would become permanent. So I think that one probably will become permanent, even though we've not seen much of Lewis Hall, but still a good young player, and I think he will get better working under Eddie Howe as well. So I expect that move to be made permanent, and again, that takes a chunk out of Newcastle's transfer budget for next summer as well. So that's why I think they're going to have to be smart and wheel and deal, and unfortunately, they are going to have to cash in on some of their prize assets. Obviously, Bruno Guimaraes, I think, is the biggest asset they've got at the club right now with that 100 million release clause, and I think the player himself, seeing what's happened at Newcastle this season, he probably wants to be playing Champions League on a regular basis. He had that taste this season as well. So when the big boys like PSG, Barcelona, Real Madrid come calling, I'm sure it's probably a move that he will probably end up pushing for as well. But I think it's quite pointed what Eddie Howe said the other week regarding transfers and everything else. He says no one wants to help Newcastle as well. And that's where the situation that Newcastle find themselves in. No one's going to do them a favour, because a lot of teams were a bit envious and not too happy with the Saudi takeover initially. So teams in the Premier League aren't going to bend over backwards and help Newcastle by offering loan players and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a difficult one for Newcastle to juggle all this right now. And I think keeping Dan Ashworth is going to be pretty key as well, because he's going to play a key role in Newcastle's transfer business over the next couple of windows with Manchester United obviously trying to prize him away from St James's Park. So not a great time for Newcastle fans when you look at it overall. They expect it to be up there challenging for the top four again this season at least. The FA Cup's probably the only thing they've got left to play for this season as well. And the thought of losing top players like Bruno, even Alex Isak and Kieran Trippier would have been unheard of last season, but it's the reality that Newcastle find themselves in right now. But they could maybe take some solace from what happened at Liverpool a couple of seasons ago when they had to sell Philippe Coutinho to Barcelona for that huge fee, and then they used that to reinvest in signing the likes of Virgil van Dijk and Alisson, and that proved pretty good business by Jurgen Klopp's team at that point.
That was what I was going to ask you. I mean, from a complete neutral's point of view, where does this stop for Newcastle? Where is the timeline? Because if they want to take that next step and use the finances that they've unarguably got, they're a hugely wealthy club, the richest club in the world. They should be going into transfer windows and going, right, we want X, Y, Z. And all these players, they should be getting what Eddie Howe wants. We know that they can't. Where does this stop for Newcastle with that? Like, Bruno, Almiron, Trippier, etc. You don't want these players to go. You want them to be the basement to build on, as they have done in the past. How long is this? Is this never going to stop for Newcastle? Or is there an end for Newcastle?
I think Newcastle are hoping there's an end, Paul, really. I think FFP regulations need to be changed, as we spoke last week. When you've got that 105 million loss over a 3-year cycle, players are going for over 100 million pounds these days, so it's not realistic anymore for that figure. I think that needs to increase, and obviously that might give Newcastle a bit more leeway to spend more money in the transfer window as well. I'm sure these regulations will change. I think there'll be a number of big clubs who'll be saying it's not viable and it doesn't work for them either. You've even seen the likes of Real Madrid have had to balance their books as well, and Barcelona, we know how much financial trouble they're in with the overspending that they've made over the last few years as well. So I think something's going to have to change, and Newcastle, for their sake, will be hoping that FFP regulations are lifted, and it will then give them more opportunity to spend the money, which they obviously got. If the owners have got the money, I don't see why they should be stopped paying or spending it, really. So for me, other than waiting for a rule change, there's nothing else other than clever player trading to keep themselves within the laws. They're basically waiting for a rule change and have to rejuvenate the squad and get better players in for a lesser budget, if you like. Yeah, 100%. I think that's where they find themselves right now. Newcastle, they're going to have to be smart in that transfer window. And to be fair to them, they have been so far. Bruno Guimaraes was a great signing from Lyon. Obviously, he's come on leaps and bounds during his time at Newcastle, and if they could sell him for £100 million, reluctantly, they would obviously love to keep him and build around him, but I think it would represent a big profit for Newcastle as well. And they are building a young team. I think if they were to lose Kieran Trippier, they've got Tino Livramento, who's in there as a ready-made replacement for me. He's been very impressive for me when he has played this season as well. So for Eddie Howe, they are planning for the future, but I think it's going to be a difficult few windows for Newcastle coming up, especially now with probably no Champions League football to offer to new signings next summer, and encouraging those big name players to come to Newcastle could be that little bit harder. And obviously then if they're losing other players, it sends out the wrong signal to potential transfer targets that maybe Newcastle isn't the place to be right now.
You've just watched a segment from Football Insider's brand new podcast, The Inside Track, with me, Lewis Pearce, alongside the guests on the show. Thanks very much for tuning in. Please do give the video a like, comment your thoughts on the topic, and feel free to share on your social media pages. If you want to listen to the full podcast episode, click the link in the description below. Keep your eyes peeled for plenty more content and exclusives here on The Inside Track.